Hey guys, welcome back to the channel where we combine airplane travel, interesting animal facts, and really horrible puns, preferably all together. And fun fact, did you know that a lot of the Middle Eastern airlines actually allow specially trained falcons to board the flight as a normal economy passenger, and they each take up one seat? How cute is that? And do you know why? Well, you see, their owners are usually very rich and are very religious, so they want to bring their birds of prey. Wait, don't go. And today, let's continue our points and miles mini-series onto part 3. How do you calculate how many miles you'll earn for a future trip? This is because a lot of the airlines intentionally make their programs as confusing as possible. So today I want to tell you exactly how you will know how many miles you're gonna get. And if you're new to the channel, please make sure you check out the playlist, the link to the top right here, because I will be referring to a lot of information that is previously mentioned in the series. So let's begin with how to calculate EQM. I will briefly glance over how you can calculate the EQM because every single program has different names they have for them. Air France call them XP, and then British Airways call them tier points. And then every single different name that they have means a completely different system. So the entire EQM is basically scattered everywhere. Some of the airlines use an experience system like Air France. So it doesn't really matter where you're flying. As long as it's domestic, it falls into a certain category. And if it's international, it falls into a different category. They calculate based upon the class, from economy to business class all the way to first class. While British Airways tier point system is more based on an exact distance threshold. So it doesn't really matter exactly how far you're flying, as long as you have a brief concept of, yeah, I know kinda it falls into this tier, you will know exactly how many elite qualifying points or miles or whatever they call it that you are gonna get, right? And a lot of the North American airlines also follow the older traditional distance-based methods. So it is basically how long you're flying on this specific flight, and then you calculate it based upon a certain percentage based upon what is called the fare basis. So what is a fare basis? No, I don't mean the economy business class. That is not a fare basis. That is just simply the class name. So just within economy, an airline will dedicate usually 10 or 15 different letters to that fare basis, right? So the idea is that economy might be in the sense that it's the cheapest class, but the airline want to differentiate the customers even more. So in order to differentiate the cheapest customers who will always book a very far in advance, they will offer a really cheap fare that is usually dedicated to some very basic economy, right? So either it will be B or O in most of the oneworld airlines. They basically mean that if you book an O fare, they kind of know that you are the kind of people who will book about 6 to 7 months ahead and will always search for the cheapest fare. So you are the least valuable passenger, right? So within the airline's internal system, it is a very good gauge of how profitable you are to the airline, and thus they will reward you miles accordingly. So now we have established what is a different fare basis. How do we check it, right? Because most of the airlines will try to make it really obscure, as it is not something that they want their customers to know. Well, a lot of them will try to provide it in small little details like this one on an American Airlines website. When you are clicking to the bookings, you can go into the detail section and you're gonna find out that this flight between Los Angeles and Tokyo falls under the O fare category. And if you are not booking directly on the airline's website, such as going through an OTA such as Expedia or Kayak or all of the others, you can usually find out that what the fare basis is by clicking into the detailed fare rule section. And this should be easy enough. You can simply make a dummy booking on any website that you want to book and then go into the details before you finalize your payment, and you will know what fare class you're gonna go with. So now you know what fare basis is. This will be the most useful tool for us to proceed into how to calculate RDM, the most important part of the mileage game. So the first step of knowing how many RDM you'll get with a certain airline or on a certain program is to figure out what program you're crediting onto. So if you are crediting onto one of the newer programs that they have been revamped into a revenue-based system, you don't need to know anything else, right? For example, American Airlines, United, Delta, and some of the big European players have all been converted into a revenue-based system. That means if you bought a ticket directly with the airline, or that is ticketed on the stock of the airline, right? That means the airline itself gave you that ticket. So they know how much it costs you on this ticket. They will basically calculate how many miles they will give you on a flat rate to depend upon how much you have paid. How do you know if you have a ticket that is ticketed by the airline? Well, the very first step is that it's very easy. If you bought the ticket on American Airlines, you are 99.999% sure that it is ticketed by American Airlines. So they know exactly how much you paid. But if you bought it from a different channel, for example, if you bought it through Expedia, how do you know which airline has ticketed your ticket? Well, it is actually kind of easy. If you go into Expedia or if you go to any other travel booking website, after you booked your ticket, you're gonna see that this ticket has a certain chain of numbers, about 13 to 14 digits near the top of the ticket, right? So that is your e-ticket number. So the e-ticket number always starts with a string of 3 numbers. Every single time you see that the first 3 numbers, you should know what airline it is. So for example, if a ticket starts with 001, it is ticketed by American Airlines. And if you don't know what number it is, you can simply copy down the first 3 letters and then Google it, right? What is the number 045, for example? And then you're gonna get back, it is LATAM Airways, right? So it is very important for you to know what kind of program you're going into. If it is American Airlines, for example, that is revenue-based, you need to figure out if it is ticketed by American Airlines itself. So now we are in this very niche scenario. We are on the ticket that is issued by the airline, and we are also crediting it onto the specific program that the airline owns. And also, the program itself is revenue-based. Okay? So in this case, how do we calculate how much RDM we are going to get? It is actually pretty easy. So the first step is to figure out how much you have paid in the base ticket fare as well as all of the airline surcharges. So the base ticket fare is not the final price you paid. This is basically how much the airline has determined to be your actual ticket price, right? So that is without all of the taxes and surcharges. And a very clear example is before paying that you will be shown a very specific fare breakdown page. You can see that the base ticket is about $90. And then you add it on top of all of the airline surcharges. This is basically what they call a fuel surcharge, a very scummy move that a lot of the airlines introduced in the past few decades. Some will call it fuel surcharge, some will call it airline surcharge, some will also simply just call it YQ or YR. So just count all of these and add on top of your base fare, right? So all of these come to the top and then you multiply by what status you have with the program. For example, if you have a ticket that is $500, you are a base member, you'll only get 2,500 miles. Yeah, it is really, really low. So it is actually a pretty nice way that you don't need to figure out what fare basis you're on. You simply know how much you have paid, take out all of the taxes, and simply add up the base fare as well as the surcharges, and then you will be good to go. Now we know all of these, let's try to move on to a different scenario. Let's say that, for example, you're still crediting it onto a revenue-based system, but the ticket itself is not issued by the airline itself. So for example, if you are trying to credit it into American Airlines A Advantage, but the ticket itself is not starting with 001. So these are actually not American Airlines tickets. So they are one of their partners tickets, such as British Airways or Japan Airlines. They do not share how much you have paid between them because, you know, it is kind of a commercial secret. So there is another way that American Airlines, the A Advantage team, will try to determine or approximate how many miles you are trying to get. And that will fall into a distance plus fare basis into a base mile model, which is similar to all of the other programs. So I'm going to combine this niche scenario with all of the other programs and go into the detail of how you can calculate your base miles and thus figuring out how you can get your RDM. So let's calculate the base miles, which is basically the airline's approximation of how profitable an airline ticket is. This is very useful because they will use this as a base number in order to calculate all of the other EQM and RDM bonuses on top of it, right? So a base mile is extremely important. So how do we calculate it? First thing we need to know is that how many miles you have flown on this specific flight, right? And once you figure out how many miles you have flown on it, we will multiply it by a specific multiplier that is only unique to every single fare class. And how do we know how many miles you have flown on an airplane? This is pretty easy. Let me introduce you to this website called the GC Map. And you can use it by simply typing in every single airport code in the entire world, and it will simply tell you how far it is in the direct distance between the two airports. And if you're doing a transit, you can simply tag on more and more and more airports, and they will simply add up all of the distance combined. So it is very easy to figure out how many miles you are flying. And the second thing is, how do we know the multiplier from the fare basis? We have already found out the fare basis. Well, we simply need to go on the airline's official website, right? So if you want to credit to a specific airline, such as Alaska Airlines, you simply go on the website and then search on that specific airline that you are going to credit onto it. So for example, for British Airways, there is a special page for every single fare basis that you can credit onto Alaska Airlines mileage plan program. So now we know the multiplier, we can multiply it into the distance that you have actually flown, which we call it BIS miles, but in seat miles. And you get the base miles. And from then on, we can calculate RDM. RDM is based upon base miles and then is influenced by two factors. First thing is called the class of service bonus. Basically, it means if you are flying business class or first class, the airlines will try to incentivize you by giving you a higher class of bonus, right? So if you are flying first class, the bonus might be 100% extra miles. And then the second thing is your status. A lot of the airlines who are still using the traditional distance-based charts will try to incentivize you by giving you more miles if you are a higher tier of elite member. The idea is that you have your base miles, and then you add up all of the bonuses from the previous two categories, and then you multiply the two together in order to get the final RDM number. So this is how you can calculate how much RDM you're gonna earn in a very specific flight. But with all of the jibber-jabbering, it can be very confusing. I know. So let's try to dig into two specific examples, one with revenue-based system and one with more traditional distance-based system.
Meanwhile,
our first example will be very simple. Remember that ticket from Los Angeles to Tokyo that I introduced earlier in the video? Well, let's try to calculate how many miles we will earn on American Airlines' own program called A Advantage with no elite status. Well, the first step is, of course, figuring out if it's revenue-based. And yep, American Airlines' A Advantage is very much a revenue-based system. So we need to go through a very specific route and figure out what's the sum of the base ticketing fare as well as the airline surcharges. So now we figure out this, we add them up together, and then we multiply it by the multiplier, which is 5 times this number. And we get a measly 3,900 miles. So it is really not that much of a profitable system anymore. So with the first example out of the way, let's move on to the second example, which is much more complicated. As for the second example, let me introduce you to this flight on British Airways directly from New York into London. Right? This is a business class ticket, and then I want to figure out how many miles I will earn on my Alaska Airlines mileage plan number, which I am an MVP Gold member on. So for any of you guys who want to take up the challenge, feel free to pause the video anytime, and then with all of the information I've given here on this photo, you can, try to figure out how many RDM and how many EQM I'm gonna get. And then for all of the others, let's just provide them with a buffer of 10-second montage of this ANA brand new A380 that looks like a very, very high sea turtle. Well, have you figured it out yourself? If you did, please keep that number handy because we are gonna do a lot of math, okay? So the first step is to figure out if Alaska Airlines mileage plan is actually a revenue-based system or not. It is clearly not a revenue-based system because I just told you so. So yeah, let's move on into the distance and fare basis calculation for the base miles. So the first step is figure out how many BIS, but in seat miles, you have flown. Well, pulling up GC Mapper, it is very clear the distance between JFK Airport and London's Gatwick Airport on this ticket is 3,470 miles. Good, but that is only one way, so we're gonna multiply by 2 in order to get how many miles you have flown for the round trip. Second step is figuring out the fare basis. Well, here I give it to you easy. It is listed literally right next to the business class letters so that you know it is an I class. So to figure out the multiplier, we go on Alaska Airlines mileage plan section and then go down into British Airways and go back to that chart. we can find out that I-class earns 100% base mile multiplier. That means nothing has changed. So now we know the base mile is this. How many EQM we are going to get? Well, going back to the chart, you're going to see that the EQM is 150% of the base miles. So it is 3,470 miles multiplied by 2 in order to get the butt-in seat miles, and then multiply by 100%, which is the base miles, and then you multiply by 150%. You get 10,410 EQM. Okay, so that is for EQM calculation. How about RDM? Remember, I told you I am an MVP Gold member. So MVP Gold member, if you go on the mileage plan section, you're going to find out that they earn 100% extra miles. And then also, don't forget that this is a business class flight. So it also gets a class of service bonus. So going back to the chart, the class of service bonus is 150%. So multiply all of these together, we have the base miles, which is 3,470 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 100%. Then we get all of the bonuses add up together. So the bonus is 100% from the MVP Gold membership, and then 150% from the business class, that is I-class. But that is extra on top of the original. So you have to add another 100% on top of it. So actually, you need to multiply the base miles by 350%. And the final result is going to be 24,290 miles. And I hope that it is very clear, because this is as clear as it can possibly be, because the airlines are trying to make it really, really complicated so that, you don't figure out how exactly the game is played. So now, after all of these, I hope you have understood how you can calculate how many EQM as well as RDM you're going to get for a specific flight, whether it is ticketed by the airline that you're going to credit onto or another airline that is simply a normal partner. So with all of these out of the way, let's move on to the next section, which is how you can use miles. So don't forget to click the like button if you have enjoyed today's video, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to move on to the next section, which is the final part of the Miles and Points mini-series. So I will see you in the next part.